Hi everyone, my name is Jenny Lynch, Senior Market Advisor with Enterprise Ireland. Welcome to the webinar today, Transatlantic Partnerships in Medtech, Rising to Meet the COVID-19 Challenge. Joining me today on the webinar are Marie O'Malley, the Senior Director of Supplier Outreach at Medtronic, and Paul Kelly, Head of Operations at Bellurgan Precision Engineering. Today on the webinar, we're going to be discussing the importance of transatlantic partnerships, collaborating for success during the pandemic, and the ways in which Enterprise Ireland supports clients. So to begin things, I'm going to just briefly show the agenda here. We're going to quickly go through a speaker introduction, talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19. Then we're going to discuss the opportunity from both a Medtronic and a Bellurgan standpoint. I'm then going to go into funding supports available from Enterprise Ireland, and then hopefully we should have some time left for some questions and answers. So to begin, as mentioned, my name is Jenny Lynch. I'm the Senior Market Advisor for the US in Life Sciences at Enterprise Ireland. I'm joined by Marie O'Malley, Senior Director of Supplier Outreach at Medtronic. Marie, maybe you might just introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here today. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Marie O'Malley. I lead supplier outreach at Medtronic. I've been with the business for over 25 years. I started with CR Bard, which I know had its start in Galway, Ireland as well. But I've been with the business for over 25 years in a number of roles, but currently serve in the supply management organization, leading responsible sourcing, supplier diversity, and also getting involved in a number of critical issues, including some of the ramp-up activities that we had recently during the pandemic. So delighted to be here today.
We're delighted to have you, Marie. I'm also joined by Paul Kelly, Head of Operations at Bellurgan Precision Engineering. Paul, I might ask you to introduce yourself to the audience today.
So it's Paul Kelly, working in Bellurgan Precision Engineering for the last 8 years. I've been in engineering for the last 20 years in different roles throughout different businesses. As part of the Bellurgan team here, we work on the operational end of it, plus the customer relation end of it, and really over the last 20 years, Medtronic have been a massive part of our business.
Perfect. So now that you know who you're speaking with, I'm going to now turn it into the first topic that we'll discuss today, which is the impact of COVID-19. So I'm going to pose a question for both of our participants today, Marie and Paul. Overall, I think 2020 has been an unprecedented year. The result of the pandemic has been felt throughout the medtech industry. Supply chains have been upended, device manufacturers have been disrupted, diagnostic developers. Really, the impact has been felt throughout the entire medtech landscape. Healthcare systems have been almost brought to the brink of collapse, all within a 6 to 8 month time frame. So I guess my first question would be, and Marie, maybe we'll start with you from a Medtronic standpoint. What has the impact of COVID-19 been on your role and on the organization more broadly?
Yeah, it's interesting that, we're in the, medtech industry, and being the largest device company, I mean, we were serving 2 patients every second. So for us, the change in the pandemic, I mean, first we had to pivot and, ensure the safety and well-being of our employees, but we still had an obligation to continue to run operations. So most of our devices are necessary to keep patients well and treat patients. So, we actually saw a pretty significant increase in some of our businesses. Medtronic is actually a supplier of ventilators. So, that's one example where we had to, reconfigure our operations to keep our employees safe, but also figure out how to dramatically ramp up production to serve the worldwide needs in this pandemic. And another just quick example is, we do a lot of remote monitoring. So that became critical during this pandemic. So from an operations standpoint, we were impacted mostly by having to ramp up operations. So it was unique in that regard.
Paul, maybe from a Bellurgan perspective, the impact of the pandemic, what has that been for Bellurgan and even, for yourself and your role at the organization?
So I suppose we've been hit by both sides of things. One is where the pandemic has hit the world, and I suppose people in general have been fearful of it, and there's been lockdowns in Ireland and different levels of lockdowns over time. Also, we had the ramp up of ventilator. We make the critical core components, machine components that go into the ventilators from Medtronic. And I suppose we just had to review then our business plan and look at our full value stream, I suppose, end to end, to look at areas that may be affected. So right from our suppliers to some of our in-house machinery, etc., to make sure that nothing was going to be affected over that period of time. We really need to modify the business plan, and that, I suppose, to meet the challenge that lay ahead. Another part of it was, I suppose, employee motivation and communication has changed in the world of social distancing and keeping distance and making sure that we work from a certain distance away from each other. Employee engagement isn't as it's a tactile. And what I would see there, that our leaders and our supervisors and our key people within the facility need to make a conscious effort to engage with their teams directly, which is different to what we've done previously. I suppose the use of IT in dealing with people also has really gone through the roof for us here. I suppose we've learned that how effective we can be through using these methods of communication. I still feel there's a place in business for the eye-to-eye discussions and face-to-face meetings, but I think we can be a lot more effective by using some of these technologies to communicate also.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think overall throughout the entire industry, we have all needed to kind of redefine the way in which we interact with one another, particularly as, travel and the opportunity to have those face-to-face meetings has really ceased. Marie, you mentioned, the immediate demand that there was from a ventilator standpoint, obviously creating a lot of pressure for Medtronic. You might be able to walk us through what that demand looked like and maybe how Medtronic responded and how, you were able to respond so rapidly.
Yeah, I guess we had seen, just from the early cases in Wuhan, China, the need to ramp up our ventilators. So the operations really started that in the January timeframe. We're manufacturing our flagship ventilator, the newest, latest technology in Galway, Ireland. So we put a plan together to, double, then triple, then quadruple. And we also looked at how we could serve the worldwide needs. I mean, it was a critical time where, as Paul mentioned, we were trying to figure out how to work safely for our employees. So I was asked to work from home, as a lot of my colleagues were, but also set up operations. So it was a progressive thing to ramp up operations, but also, make sure we had the supply base and the components that could serve that. And the other thing Medtronic did is we had, one of our more basic ventilators, we open sourced the design for that so that other people could manufacture that ventilator to support the unprecedented need that we saw. It was just, we felt a huge obligation, responsibility to make sure every patient that needed a ventilator got a ventilator. So I think, that was the first time Medtronic had ever done that, to just release their designs so that others could manufacture ventilators. We also partnered with other ventilator manufacturers and put together an app with user guides so that, healthcare workers would have easy access to that. So I think there was a number of things that as an industry we tried to do to make sure that, patients would be served.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the point that you mentioned around Medtronic open sourcing some of their designs for ventilators, it really just, I think, emphasizes the point and the seriousness of the pandemic, and I guess the trend that I've noticed with regards to global collaboration and the opportunities from a global perspective, that are out there within the medtech landscape. So with regards to that, and with regards to that massive demand that Medtronic, experienced, what was it about Bellurgan that, made you turn to them during this during this hour of need?
Well, as Paul mentioned, we've had a long-term relationship with Bellurgan, and they were there with us when we did launch this latest technology ventilator. And they actually were a recipient of our Supplier Excellence Award, I think 3 years ago now, just for their great work in helping us ramp up and launch that product in our global markets. So we had a long-standing relationship where we knew they were very dependable and had, you know, great capabilities and expertise, and we were really dependent on them, but confident, and partnered with them to work on investing new equipment and put the infrastructure in place, and, you know, get the people in place to ramp up. You know, we have that device has over 1,500 components that come from over 100 suppliers, but Bellurgan is providing one of those critical, more complex components. And, you know, we knew they were up for the challenge, but had a number of meetings with them to ensure that, you know, we were on track and partnered well together, kept open lines of communication. But we knew they had that high standard of quality and operational excellence that, you know, we're expected to deliver on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with that in mind, you know, and now I think we've kind of gotten a little bit of a better picture as to how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted both of your organizations. I might turn, Paul, to yourself. When Medtronic approached Bellurgan, and, you know, obviously, as Marie has mentioned, it was a long-standing relationship that already existed. How did Bellurgan kind of, you know, meet that demand from Medtronic? Really, you know, it seems from not only what Marie has said, but, you know, from the evidence in market, that Bellurgan really rose to the challenge and met the demand head on. Maybe you might be able to walk us through that. And for some of the attendees in the audience, you know, you might talk a little bit about what was required internally from Bellurgan to meet this very external challenge.
I suppose when Medtronic came to us with this ask, I suppose the management team here and family owners and the directors of the company bought into this challenge, and really we were going to support Medtronic throughout this ramp. We felt that we needed our employees to understand that as well. So a large part of the challenge we had to respond to this Medtronic need was to engage our employees so that they understood what lay ahead. I suppose at this time, people's families were very concerned. The country was in a lockdown, and their loved ones kind of were being asked to come in to work long hours, maybe to, I suppose, expedite some of the parts through our systems and such. So we then needed, I suppose, the employees to fully buy into the task so that they could then communicate it to their families, etc. Just to give everybody a bit of security around what we were doing and the reason why we were doing it. I suppose they needed kind of to visualize the Medtronic goal here of the number of ventilators that Medtronic wanted to get out. I suppose another end of what we had to do is to create some extra capacity. We had to go out to our existing customer base, and they were in various industries, to open up some capacity on our machine shop. We really needed them. I suppose we had to go out and explain the humanitarian crisis that was out there. I suppose everybody knew about that, but how much Bellurgan needed to free up this capacity to, I suppose, help what was happening around the world. Like, it was calls, it was phone calls, and it was communication that we had that really we weren't looking forward to. What we found was that the response was very favourable, very positive to what we were doing and how we were engaging in what was happening around the world. And they I suppose, they supported us in what we were looking to do. From the beginning, internally, we dedicated resources within the business solely to work on the COVID-19 team. I suppose to monitor employees' health and their attitudes to what was going on around the world, plus to monitor the national guidelines, so that we were very much in tune with what was happening in the country as well on a daily basis, because things were changing at different stages very, very quickly here. So we just needed to be make sure that our employees were safe, that they knew what the rules were, what we required them when they come into work each day. I suppose the other element of it was to drive some of this ramp, we needed to drive recruitment within the business, which was always done. We always like to do our recruitment face to face to get I suppose, a feel for the people that we were employing. And now we just moved away from that altogether. So it was a different way of interviewing people. It was a different way of judging the person as such. Different questions. The leaders that were doing the interviewing, they had to, I suppose, tailor their interviewing methods to be able to accommodate that.
Absolutely.
And then the company then, we redesigned how we rolled out training. I suppose we had to take in new people. We had to, I suppose, get them to be trained by our current employees, and we didn't want to, I suppose, put any risk at our current employees' health by having to do that for us. So that was, I suppose, a big part of the people end of it. We increased floor space out here. We increased machine count. We I suppose, put a lot of things in place over a very short space of time.
And Paul, you had mentioned to me in a previous conversation we had, the implementation of COVID-19 officers at Bellurgan, individuals that would have undergone training as it pertains to the regulation and the requirements of having a COVID-19 compliant facility. I think, that's certainly worthwhile mentioning perhaps to the audience, because I think it's certainly very important. But it is unique in terms of the conversations that I have had. I know that, COVID-19 officers are becoming more and more commonplace within, facilities and manufacturing. But from a Bellurgan perspective, how did you go about kind of, training up those individuals, making sure that, there is regulation, there is compliance within the facility, and all the while, you are meeting this incredible demand that is coming in from, your external partners?
I suppose the first thing is to pick the right person to do the job. It needed to be somebody that people respect within the business, that could communicate well, that could and actually really cared about people's health. And I suppose we picked two key people within the business, and we put them through I think 3 different training courses just to make sure that they got a good flavour of what was needed to be able to, I suppose, keep our people safe, put the correct rules in place, and be able to communicate it in the correct way also. So.
And just, to expand a little bit on something else you had mentioned, certainly the recruitment of, additional individuals, the ramp up of, individuals that were already with Bellurgan to meet demand, the increasing of the square footage, at the facility itself. Obviously, juggling a number of different initiatives all at the same time. Were there any challenges associated with, meeting the demand that, you had been faced with?
Yeah, so I suppose we had two elements there. One is to put all the infrastructure in place, so the machinery, the electrical supply that we needed, the raw material that we needed to, I suppose, procure to get to this ramp and to get the timing of everything right. But in the same time as that there, we still needed to keep production going. I suppose that was the real juggling act, where Medtronic were still putting out quantities of ventilators every week, and it was increasing month by month. It was increasing. It was doubling, trebling, quadrupling, etc. And what we were seeing there was that we needed to keep up with that ramp, but still be looking ahead. So it was the immediate need of being able to ramp up current production, but then where our numbers were going to be in 4 weeks' time. We needed material in, we needed the right machinery in, we needed different teams within the business working on these things all at the same time, but all, I suppose, there had to be a continuity between everybody, and I suppose that's what the management team here kind of worked towards over that period of time. Communication with Medtronic was fantastic as well. The teams that we worked with there helped us immensely to, I suppose, make sure that we didn't miss anything, and to make sure that we were hitting their need on a weekly basis, plus that we were going to hit their need in 2 months' time, 3 months' time. So some of the help and I suppose the different resources that Medtronic had that we could tap into was really important during that period.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with that in mind, Marie, I might turn back to yourself. You might be able to talk a little bit about, you know, the success of this partnership with Bellurgan. I mean, they certainly seemed to, you know, be very agile during, you know, this time when the demand was ramping up from a Medtronic standpoint, and, you know, utilizing the multifunctional workforce that they had there. So you might talk a little bit about what that looked like from a Medtronic standpoint and how that success was achieved from your perspective.
Yeah, I think Paul highlighted a lot of things, but for us, I mean, it was unprecedented. So we just knew that we didn't have enough supply industry-wide. So all of our competitors were also trying to ramp up, but you know, we had a fairly significant market share, but now we had an unprecedented need too. So we were just trying to figure out what we could do from our own operations standpoint, but then also suppliers like Bellurgan. And again, the component we're getting from them is probably one of the more difficult and challenging components to ramp up and produce. So it was that level of constant communication. We were looking to what we could do from our own operations standpoint, but also keeping that regular communication open with Bellurgan and the leadership team there to see what they were going to be capable of. And I think we did a pretty nice job of keeping in lockstep throughout that process, and we're able to successfully meet all those milestones that we set for ourselves. So I'm pretty proud of the way we were able to coordinate, you know, our global team. A lot of our supply management team were based in the US, partnering with the Irish operations that we had in Galway, but also, you know, the supply base that was there as well as throughout the world. So I think it was that regular communication and kind of working through any of the hurdles or issues that were faced during this so that we could all be successful and make sure that we were able to meet the demand needs that we were seeing.
And were there any challenges, you know, that you came up against? I understand both from, you know, what you've mentioned there and also what Paul has said, that communication was key and consistent communication, almost over communication to ensure the success of the partnership. But were there any challenges, you know, that Medtronic needed to kind of overcome to ensure the successful outcome here?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was not easy for any party involved in this. So, you know, first you had to make sure that your employees felt safe and secure, not only for their own health, but their families. So we did have to shift, and everybody that could work remotely was asked to work remotely, but then had those critical operators and support team that we depended on to come to the facility. And the same is true for our suppliers. So, you know, we were fortunate enough that we had, you know, those ventilators are produced at the Legacy Covidian site, which is in pretty close proximity to the Legacy CR Bard facility in Parkmore, which are both now Medtronic facilities. So we were able to leverage some of the workforce that we had in our other operations. Ireland for us is a manufacturing center of excellence, so we have quite a presence there, but we were able to leverage that workforce and then also be able to help support, you know, our suppliers in terms of their ramp up. And I think some of the bigger challenges is, you know, as Paul mentioned, just getting the equipment in place and making sure that you have the operators that can work, you know, on extended shifts or, you know, add to the existing team, because, you know, when you're talking about tripling or quadrupling the volumes, that's never an easy thing, especially in the medical device world where, you know, every part has to be perfect and it has to meet all of the requirements and expectations to deliver the high quality and critical technology and devices that, you know, we're expected to provide for our patients.
Absolutely. You know, 100%. And I know that you know, from a global perspective, there have been different regulations and different ways in which devices and technologies pertaining to COVID-19 solutions have been fast-tracked. But really, you know, the safety of these devices and the implementation of these devices, I don't think has ever been questioned. So, you know, it's certainly a testament, I think, to both Medtronic and Bellurgan with regards to the success of this overall partnership. Paul, with regards to that, you know, I do think that Bellurgan has kind of highlighted, you know, the best of Irish medtech, if you don't mind me saying so myself, during the past few months. You know, the ability of Bellurgan to meet this humanitarian challenge head on, I think, has been really commendable. With that in mind, you know, is there any advice or would there be any insight that you might be able to share, you know, for the audience today, perhaps other companies from a global standpoint that, you know, might be looking to utilize opportunities within the medtech industry, you know, build perhaps upon relationships such as the one that you have with Medtronic, you know, ultimately to capitalize on the demand and on, you know, the opportunity that does exist today?
I suppose, excuse me, a challenge I suppose that COVID-19 pandemic has put in front of us, we would class it as a once-in-a-generation business event. This, we feel that after 42 years of business here, that we are positioned to respond to. I suppose that experience and that longevity of experience within the business has positioned us and made us, I suppose, agile and I suppose ready to respond. We have a multi-skilled workforce here, and I suppose they've allowed us to flex and to move as our customers have required. We've built long-lasting customer relationships, and I suppose how we've done that is we've engaged fully in customers' products and their company plans. I suppose Marie mentioned it earlier there, where Medtronic's product, we've been involved in this from the very beginning in certain ventilators that they produce, and really we've built up a knowledge then of how the product works and a relationship with the engineers to be able to solve any problems or to look at any opportunities within that I suppose that value stream for Medtronic. That's allowed us then, because we've had that knowledge, when this ramp or when this ask has come, we were very knowledgeable about how we could best I suppose meet what they required. Bellurgan's, I suppose, that understanding of Medtronic's products and also open communication with multi-site teams throughout Ireland, the US, is really a success story in this partnership, and I suppose it's helped us to be open and to be able to react to things quickly, in the fact that we were very responsive and between I suppose Bellurgan, Medtronic in Ireland and Medtronic in the US, we could open up and we could get decisions made very quickly, and I suppose our relationship with Medtronic is what made the demand increase over the past 6 months possible. And if there was a bit of advice I was going to give to other companies out there, would be to try and develop deep relationships within their own customers. You know, because when things like this happen, it's their relationships and the knowledge that you have of the product that really helps you.
Yeah, I think, you know, I would absolutely agree with that. You know, I do think that developing that strong relationship really serves as the platform for further growth, and I think that that's really great advice to be able to give, you know, to our audience today. Before we shift into, you know, the supports that Enterprise Ireland can provide from its own perspective and its own standpoint to client companies, I do want to quickly ask, and you know, I know that this is probably not going to be the easiest question, but I'm sure that you've both been asked it, you know, during the overall pandemic. You know, what, Marie, maybe I might go to you first. You know, what do you think would be on the horizon moving forward? You know, from a Medtronic standpoint, you know, obviously the company is still incredibly perspective, you know, the pandemic is far from over. The company is still incredibly active with regards to, you know, the current demand it's seeing and will likely continue to see for the next 6 to 12 months. But from, you know, if our companies, you know, were to look to the horizon today, I mean, what do you envision the medtech landscape looking like? Do you think that there will be any long-lasting change spurred from the COVID-19 pandemic, and maybe, you know, spurred from the relationships that you needed to develop as a result of the demand that was placed upon Medtronic?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think it's been an interesting time for everybody, you know, obviously globally, but certainly in the med device world. I mean, we saw the obligations that we had and responsibility during this pandemic, and I think have been pretty successful in figuring out how to continue to run operations and serve our patients. We've also experienced some of the slowdowns that people have seen while, you know, people have been hesitant to go to hospitals for those, you know, non-essential procedures. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the next couple of months progress. But we're, you know, we expected to have a reduction in terms of our performance. We just released our first quarter earnings and we did see that, but it wasn't as significant as we thought. I think the other thing that we saw was the interest in remote patient care monitoring. So we did have a number of those devices, but we saw a huge surge in demand for that. And the benefits of being able to do telehealth or digital health, I think has, you know, is only going to accelerate that. I mean, that's always been one of the technologies we've been looking at, and I think we have some solutions out there, but that's only going to accelerate it in the marketplace where it can be effective for that remote monitoring. But I think, you know, medical device is still a great place to be in. You know, I think the future is still positive. I think it's also taught us that we can make decisions much faster than historically we've been able to make. It's taught us that we've been able to effectively work remotely in some instances. So I think that may change how we conduct our business. I think we have been slow in the past and have required a lot of people to get involved in our decision making and gotten a little bit more bureaucratic as a large organization. And I think, you know, as Paul mentioned, we were able to come quickly, make decisions because we empowered people so we could move a lot quicker. And I think that's, you know, a good lesson for us of how we may want to structure ourselves going forward so we can be more agile and more efficient, quite honestly.
Fantastic answer. You know, I think that a lot of large multinational corporations have realized, you know, the impact of making decisions, you know, quicker, being a little more effective, more streamlined internally. And, you know, I know from conversations that I've had that certainly continuing that streamlining internally is going to be something that will stick around and be a long-lasting effect of the changes that have needed to be made during the pandemic. Paul, you know, from a Bellurgan standpoint, you know, what does Bellurgan see on the horizon, you know, not only for itself, but for the market more broadly?
Yeah, I suppose from an internal point of view, we've looked at what's happened over the last period of time, and we've always held overall capacity, I suppose, to meet the ever-changing needs of multinational customers. But we could never have held the amount of capacity that was needed over I suppose the last 6 months to meet this ramp. So what we've had to do is look at other ways of opening up capacity internally within the business, and I suppose what we're looking at now is retaining some of the shift employee flexibility, which has been developed over the 6 months, and maybe implementing that into the business going forward. As demand returns to normal levels again of ventilators, this flexibility will help us to continuously flex capacity as it's needed for our customers. I suppose we're a family-owned business, and we've always held our employees kind of as our most valuable asset. I suppose during this pandemic, we've noted that people's, I suppose, their mental health and well-being over this period of time has been affected with the various lockdowns that have been in place. So really what we've done is we've taken increased steps to acknowledge and support the employees, and it's something that going forward I think that we'll all take on, I suppose, particularly within our leaders within the business there, to be able to, I suppose, support people going forward throughout. I suppose this was just, it came to the fore because of how the enormity of what was happening, but I think it's something that we will always I suppose have in our business from now on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the emphasis on employee well-being, not only from a physical perspective, but also from that mental health standpoint, is something that, a lot of companies will choose to emphasize more moving forward. Okay, so I mean, wonderful answers from you both there. I'm going to take this opportunity now to give you both a little bit of a break. I'm going to talk a little bit or about the different kinds of supports that Enterprise Ireland can offer client companies. But before I dive into that, just from an audience standpoint, I will say that if anyone has any questions for our participants, we will be having a Q&A session at the end. So if you want to, type any questions that you might have into the chat box, we'll be happy to get to those in just a moment. From an Enterprise Ireland perspective, we do have a number of funding supports available for client companies that might have been adversely affected as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The fund that I do want to particularly emphasize today is the Sustaining Enterprise Fund. This was launched in April of this year as a result of COVID-19 and is there to enable client companies to stabilize, reset, and ultimately recover as a result of the pandemic. It is a flexible funding, so you can apply for different stages of funding. On the smaller scale, from between €25,000 to €50,000, right the way through to the larger scale of up to €800,000. There are a number of different eligibility criteria. But by and large, I think, in terms of how companies apply, it is relatively straightforward. All of the details can be found on the Enterprise Ireland website, which I've linked here, and you will have a copy of these slides at the end of the webinar itself. For any client companies that might be listening today, you can also connect with your development advisor or go onto the COVID-19 Business Response Unit. Again, I've provided that link here. As I mentioned, the application process, we are trying to process applications as quickly as possible and make it as straightforward as possible. So, should you express an interest in this SEF fund, you'll be sent an application. Your application will then be assessed, and we will try and approve that application as quickly as possible and get back to you. I have listed also some evaluation criteria here, just a demonstration of the COVID-19 impact and ultimately the funding requirements in terms of eligibility for the fund itself. A review of the sustainability project plan for the individual companies, company financials, and then your plan for returning to economy. Again, if you do have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out, not only to Enterprise Ireland overall, but should you have a dedicated development advisor, do not hesitate to reach out to that individual. Yeah, so, please, if there are any questions, don't hesitate. But Enterprise Ireland overall looks forward to hearing from you with regards to this Sustaining Enterprise Fund. We are on hand to provide, the necessary support and assistance to clients as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. One final thing that I will mention, I've linked some additional supports here for your convenience. And I would just like to highlight, that we do also have International Markets Week coming up from an Enterprise Ireland standpoint. This will be an opportunity to interact with the market advisors from, markets. If you do have any questions, if you have any concerns that you'd like to talk through, please do not hesitate to reach out. You can contact the International Markets Week dedicated team at imwsupport@enterprise-ireland.com. We are seeing significant numbers of registration coming in, and meeting time slots are filling up. So I would advise any and all clients attending this webinar today to register early and submit, your request for meetings to avoid disappointment. So with that in mind, I will now turn, to the Q&A portion of the webinar, turn back to our panelists. If there are any questions, that you would have for Marie or for Paul or for myself, once again, please do not hesitate to drop them into the chat box. We'd be happy to get to those questions. We do have about 20 to 15 minutes or so to kind of go through any Q&A from the audience. So I'm just looking through the chat box here. Give me just one moment. So, okay, we've had a lot of questions come in. Okay. So the first one is to Marie. Medtronic overall is a global company with suppliers that are all over the world. So how has your experience been in dealing with suppliers from Ireland specifically compared to other regions?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in my role, I also liaise pretty closely with our government affairs team and help navigate any supplier relationship in various geographies. So specific to the ventilator, those components are coming from 100 different suppliers in 14 different countries. We have always had an excellent relationship with the Irish government, and have found the support from Enterprise Ireland, and just the whole ecosystem there has been very strong. I think Ireland has a very strong Medtech focus, and even early on in the pandemic, I think our CEO and our incoming CEO were over in Ireland meeting with the Taoiseach, just understanding the obligation that we had as a collective organizations to support this pandemic. I've also had to navigate situations in other countries where the government has put really strict movement control orders in place and shelter in place, which I think we had in Ireland as well as the United States. But I think there was also a process that was pretty streamlined for exemptions for those that were in the medical device or critical, essential production areas. Other geographies didn't always understand that, and they just really tried to shut things down, which, can look like it's a good thing to do from a health and wellness standpoint, but then there's a knock-on negative effect if we can't supply ventilator components or diabetes insulin pumps to patients that urgently need them. That could be an even more significant health consequence. So I think for us, I spent a lot of late nights on calls with Asian governments trying to get exemptions for various suppliers, or in other areas that weren't as, I guess, progressive or understanding the criticality of our, medical device companies, as well as the supply base supporting them. So I will say our experience in Ireland has always been very positive. I think it's such a critical part of the economy in Ireland, but also, there's been ongoing investments to make that a really strong base for companies like Medtronic. I mean, most of our competitors are in Ireland as well, and that's why we have a significant supply base. And I think the Irish government and companies that are based there understand that. So it's always been a good working relationship. And I think even with some of the strains of this pandemic, I think it's been easy for us to partner with our Irish supply base.
Well, I mean, we're certainly delighted to hear that, from an Irish perspective, and I think that that's a fantastic answer, Marie. Another question come in.
Sorry, Jenny, just to add to
Go
that
ahead, Paul.
from the
Yeah, go ahead.
Bellurgan perspective there, I suppose the governing bodies of Ireland there have really helped us. The local authorities here have helped us where we needed to put more square footage onto the facility. They've helped us with planning regulations for the new building. We've also had to get increased electrical supply into the plant for a lot of the new machinery that came in. So over a weekend, the local or the Irish electrical supplier, the ESB, actually came in over the weekend. So they didn't do it during the week, they did it on the weekend so that they could keep our production running during the week. And
Sure.
I suppose that's the kind of things that went on without, I suppose, any big fanfare or any any real, I suppose, headlines around that there, but the things that were happening in the background there for us without really us having to push them was fantastic from an Irish point of view. They bought into what we were doing and what we were trying to do, partnering with Medtronic.
Absolutely. I mean, that's wonderful to hear, that it really was all hands on deck. And from an Irish perspective, very encouraging. Another question that we've had come in is, what do you see as the priority for Medtech moving forward, perhaps pertaining to investing in new innovations or maintaining the current business as we head through the pandemic? So Marie, I might go to you first on that as to the priority for Medtech moving forward, and any kind of focus areas that you see on the horizon as being key investment opportunities for new innovation.
Yeah, I think one of the priorities, I mean, we worked through a number of business continuity challenges, but I think this COVID-19 challenge has really stretched us to beyond what we thought we could do. And I think it really highlighted our need to have resiliency in our own operations as well as our supply base. So I think from an operations supply management standpoint, we understand we're going to have to do an even better job on business continuity. I mean, we went through some Herculean efforts to be able to do what we were able to do these last couple months, but we need to be able to have those contingencies, I think, in better place going forward, should there be other events. So, where we're not as exposed and have to do some of the extreme things we had to do during this pandemic. So I think that's just, highlights, and it's been a focus of ours for probably 5 years with the hurricanes and the fires and, various supply chain challenges. But I think that's stretched us even more to think of, it's an important thing. And as Paul mentioned, we now have, critical role in our organization, which is risk management and looking at that enterprise wide and making sure that we can continue to serve our patients that are dependent on us. I think from a technology standpoint, I talked a little bit about it, but I think, that remote care, remote access, even the ventilator that we have has technology that allows remote monitoring of a patient so that you're not exposing the healthcare workers unnecessarily. They can actively monitor the patient in a different room. We have remote care monitoring for a number of our devices for cardiac and diabetes patients. So I think that is gonna, from a technology standpoint, continue to grow. I think that whole area of being able to be remotely monitored by your caregiver, I think worked well in some instances during the pandemic, and others it didn't. I've even had, my daughter had to visit a doctor and it was telehealth and on a video. That wasn't necessarily the most effective. I think there's still going to be the need for in-person care, and patients are still going to need devices and treatment. But I think there are still opportunities where you can do that. So the whole digital health, I think, is an area that will continue to advance. And I think it has been accelerated from this pandemic.
Absolutely. We're also seeing a huge pivot towards the digitization of healthcare overall, you know, and that emphasis from a telehealth standpoint on technologies that can mitigate the risk of infectious disease spread, you know, obviously pertaining to the COVID-19 pandemic. Perhaps from your standpoint, you know, just because I think it is a really good question, the priority for Medtech moving forward, will the priority from a Bellurgan standpoint remain the same? I know that earlier in the conversation you had mentioned that you did need to have some conversations with other customers and inform them of the demand that you were experiencing from a Medtronic perspective. You know, is this something whereby you will need to perhaps re-engage those customers in the future? Will the priority for Bellurgan remain on this relationship with Medtronic moving forward? Do you foresee an expansion in terms of your focus areas? If you could maybe shine some light on that, I think that might be really valuable for our audience.
Yeah, I suppose we've made a commitment to Medtronic to go on this journey with them and to fully implement this journey and to keep on it as long as this lasts, as long as there's that I suppose world need for ventilators. I suppose both businesses will be very much focused on that. In the background, we need to be looking at I suppose our existing other customers and how best to serve them and how to I suppose make sure that their need is met also in whatever way we can do to help that. I suppose we'll go the main thing that we'll be looking at over the next while with other customers is analysing our capacity, analysing where we can best I suppose open up some capacity, but not jeopardizing any numbers or any I suppose figures or ventilator numbers that Medtronic need to put out. It's
sure.
Yeah, so I think over the next 6 months it would be about communication with our existing customers, making sure that they're aware of where we are, making sure that we're aware of where they are, making sure the relationship is still there, and making sure that if there is places where we can help people, that we really jump at them opportunities to help them as much as possible. But as I said, Medtronic would be that commitment that we've made to them is foremost at what all our employees are about at the moment here within Bellurgan.
Thank you, Paul. We appreciate that. We appreciate the support of your entire team. It means a lot to us.
I think over when the numbers go back to a more normal level, I suppose some of the confidence that we've built over this period of time at the speed that we could change how our business ran is key now, that we keep that learnings and the confidence that we have, and we've developed kind of an agility and a flexibility within the team, that when we do see what the next challenge is that lies ahead within our Medtronic journey, we're ready for it.
I think, you know, that might be a good place, you know, to leave it for today. If anyone has any, you know, last minute questions, I know we have just under 5 minutes or so left, but if anyone has any last questions, maybe you might try and get one more in now. But, you know, overall, I think the conversation that we've been able to have today with Marie and with Paul has really emphasized the importance of those transatlantic partnerships, particularly during a time such as this that we're all going through at the moment with the COVID-19 pandemic. I also think, you know, that it has emphasized that global opportunities remain within the medtech industry, and that there are, you know, significant opportunities for client companies of Enterprise Ireland and for small to mid-sized companies within all regions. I myself, you know, I'm based here in the US, but I know from colleagues that are in Europe and in the APAC region that, you know, this demand within the medtech industry is being felt right across the world. So I hope today that we were able to shed some light on what a successful partnership within the medtech industry looks like during this time of the pandemic, and also, you know, what the future might look like on the horizon. I saw that we just had a last minute question come in, and Paul, it's to yourself. So I might ask you to have the last word here. The question is around supplier relationships from a Bellurgan standpoint and how they have developed during the unprecedented 6-month period during 2020. So I might ask you to wrap up the overall webinar with an answer to that question.
I suppose our supplier relationships have been developed over many years, and I suppose with this capacity ramp up, we needed their support, and we needed I suppose them to understand what the need was. We also felt that we needed to help them to restructure up their business and to help them develop their business to open up capacity. So that's not always the easiest thing to do, because they obviously have their magic that they want to keep, I suppose, to themselves, etc. But we needed to, as openly as we could, have open conversations, try and open up capacity and try and help them, I suppose, give us confidence that they could meet this need of this ramp as we were ramping. I suppose this period has developed an understanding and kind of a respect for each other's value add, and really, I suppose, I suppose that's kind of helped us, I suppose, and will help us for the future, where I suppose developing on that kind of respect that we have for our suppliers. Another element of what Bellurgan have done is, I suppose, over the last 20 years, particularly for Medtronic, we've developed certain processes in-house. So we've looked at certain product ranges for Medtronic, and we've tried to become vertically integrated. And with that business model, it's kind of given us control of the full value stream of certain products for Medtronic. This meant that as something like this pandemic has hit, we could flex and we could create capacity and we could move with the numbers at a I suppose, a more confident way, rather than relying on somebody else. So it was really on the critical parts that a number of years ago we developed the process in-house, and that's been a key part of how we've met this I suppose need, and this world need of ventilators over the last 6 months.
Perfect. You know, I mean, unless there is anything else, Marie, that you might like to add, or, you know, anything additional from yourself, Paul, I do think, you know, that we can wrap it up there. We're just coming up to the top of the hour. I'll remind all of our participants and the audience members today that, you know, the slides will be provided. The information around the Sustaining Enterprise Fund will be included there from an Enterprise Ireland standpoint. Also the information to sign up for our upcoming International Markets Week taking place at the beginning of October. That information will also be included in the slides. If there are any additional questions, there will be information to reach out to Enterprise Ireland. Do not hesitate to do so. I hope that, you know, this has been of benefit and value to the audience today. Once again, just emphasizing the importance of transatlantic partnership. Always, but particularly during a global pandemic, which has been a very trying time for I think, you know, every industry and every individual around the world. So with that, I will, wrap things up today. Thank everyone so much for joining, and, you know, thank you both to Marie and to Paul for your time this morning. I myself have found it to be very valuable, and I know that our audience has found it to be of value as well. So thank you both.
Thank you, Jenny. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose, Jenny, thank you very much for yourself and your team there within Enterprise Ireland. It is a great opportunity to get up and, I suppose, discuss these things at the moment. And sometimes you're in the middle of everything that's happening, and it's good to get time just to discuss with Marie and with Medtronic just how things have gone over the last 6 months. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye both. We'll speak to you again soon, and goodbye all.
Thank you.